May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Shortly after the first season of Dancing with the Stars, I decided that I wanted to learn how to ballroom dance. I had never danced before in my life. So I went to the ballroom company in Toledo, and they said, of course we can teach you how to dance. I learned after my first lesson that my instructor went back to the rest of the instructors and said, I don't know if I can teach this woman how to dance. But it was about a year later, and it was a Saturday afternoon, and the first showcase was going on. And I was the last dancer of the afternoon. And my parents had come up to see my showcase, at which my mother had said, I thought by the time you were 10 I had escaped things like this. And I was wearing makeup, which somebody else had applied since I didn't know how. And my hair was done and sprayed with some concoction to keep it in place. I was wearing clothes I would never, ever, ever wear outside of the ballroom. And I was dancing the waltz. And I managed to get through my routine without too many stumbles or missteps. And of course, to great applause. And one of my friends even brought a rose and ran out onto the dance floor to give me the rose. And God was doing a new thing. One that I would have never imagined years before. This theme of God doing a new thing runs through all of our lessons this morning. In fact, the prophet Isaiah says, I am doing a new thing. In the reading from Isaiah this morning, the people had been kept in captivity in Babylon for many generations and were about to be set free to go back home to Jerusalem. The problem was almost none of them remembered Jerusalem. Most of those who had lived in Jerusalem had died. And so this was something brand new and different, and the people were afraid and uncertain. And so God is reassuring them and saying, I am taking this and making something new from it. Making something new of you. You who were in slavery before, you who were captive, are going to be captive no longer. And you are going to be my people again in a new way. The Apostle Paul speaks also of being made new. In the beginning of the lessons from the Philippians this morning, he really roots himself in his Jewish history. Circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the tribe of Benjamin, the son of a Pharisee. Paul is essentially sort of laying out his credentials for us, telling us who he was, and also admitting that he was one of the great persecutors of the early church, one who was happy to see Christians killed in whatever fashion. And in fact, Paul is reputed to have stood there and held the cloaks of those who stoned Stephen to death. And yet Paul says, I am no longer that person. God has taken who I was and made something new, something unanticipated, something different. And we even get that sense in our gospel this morning, although it's not exactly obvious. But Jesus is again at Bethany, sitting at table with who? Lazarus, who not very long ago was decaying in the tomb, but no longer, because Jesus rose, caused him to rise to new life, brought him back from the dead, did something new, something that could be unanticipated, something no one could have imagined. And then Mary anoints his feet with perfume that was normally reserved for burial. And obviously the gospel writer John is giving us sort of a precursor to Jesus' death. But we know that the story didn't end with the death. The story continues on when God did something spectacularly new. And Jesus rose from the dead. So we have this great theme this morning of making things new. But God doesn't just take something else and change it. God doesn't say, you know what, you Israelites, you have been so much trouble to me all these years. I'm going over here and I'm going to find another group of people to be the chosen ones. Somebody I can work with more easily because you all just cause me headache one after another. That's not what God does. God doesn't take someone who is already becoming a faithful Christian and make them a theologian and an apostle. God takes Paul, who was the persecutor of the church. Paul, who would have been the ones that had other people going, what is that guy doing? He's the one that's supposed to be killing Christians, not throwing his lot in with the Christians. God takes Paul and does something new. Something nearly impossible by most human standards. God takes what there is to work with and makes something new. God takes each of us right where we are, with all of our faults, our scars, our challenges, and our gifts. And I sometimes think about this process as sort of an old piece of furniture. If you've ever taken an old desk or an old dresser or something, something that's been kicked around for years and painted over and over and over again, and it's scratched and dented in a mess, and you take the paint off, and you start to see what was there, and you take that old varnish off, and the grain of the wood starts to become apparent. And maybe you have to get in there and sand it down because there's burns or scratches or scars in it from something that happened long ago. And you work at it, and you work at it, and you work at it. And what you start to see is the beauty that was there, the possibility of what was underneath. And I think that's what God does with us. God takes each one of us and looks underneath, sees what's there, strips away some of that old paint that is holding us back, fills in some of those grooves where we've gotten scarred or scratched from something that was hard, something that made us fearful and uncertain. And God starts to polish it. Puts some nice new stain on there, a nice new varnish, and polishes it up. And polishes us up. And makes something new. God doesn't leave us over here and say, you are clearly too much work. God is not my dance teacher who was ready to say, this woman is clearly too much work. God takes each of us, works with what is here, creates something new. This is a wonderful theme for us as we start to come to the end of Lent, a time when maybe you've given something up or taken something on. Maybe you've been following Lent Madness or watching the monks' videos, whatever you've been doing this Lent. God has been using that to start to create something new, to start to take each one of us and find what's underneath, to bring out the beauty. So as we come to the close of Lent this year, ask yourself that question. Where is God polishing me? Where am I being made new? And where can I take that gift that God is giving me and share it with those around me? Amen.